Hello and welcome again to another video. In this video, we are going to address a line which I personally think is one of the most dangerous lines at the moment that we could face in the exchange variation. And this chapter is called Six Moves Alternatives for White. Yet there's only one real well, not just one. Other moves are dangerous too, but there's one which stands out to me in particular because it's super aggressive and white gets a lot of tricks in the position, and that's the move A4 right now. So this move is a move that I was going to recommend to a friend of mine actually to try out from the white side. Because the point is very simple of this. If we now play the move G6, then white's going to play A5, Knight D7, Knight F3. And white has a much better version compared to the lines that we saw previously in, for example, chapter 1.1 of the exchange variation. Or in this case, since we already played Knight F3, chapter 1.3. And the engine gives a large advantage for white here. And therefore we do have to play the move A5 here, unfortunately. And if white does not play the move Knight C3, G6, and now C5, this is the move that really scares me. If white doesn't do that, then we basically get a better version of the lines that we've already taken a look at. So for example, if we play the move Knight F3, Bishop G7, and now H3, then after short castle, Bishop E2, let's say that white plays exactly the same as in those chapters. Knight C6, short castle. Knight C6 is already nice because if white plays D5, we can play Knight B4. And the knight is exceptionally well placed on b4. It's a tremendous piece, which shows, of course, why a4, a5 could be a drawback if played this way for white. Short castle, bishop f5. We have ideas connected to d5 and to knight b4. And basically everything that white does from now on, white has a worse version of what we discussed in the previous chapters here on the h3 line. So basically, I could not find one way for white to make use of this a4, a5 inclusion if white plays normally. So I've added a few more moves in this position, but I think it's kind of clear that we don't have to go into this a little more deep. So let's say white plays bishop e3, plays the most popular line, d7, rook c1, short castle, b3. Well, now we can simply play knight c6, and once again, it's not clear what white has gotten with a4 and a5 included, because our knight is going to jump perfectly happy to the b4 square sooner or later. So, I clicked, I shouldn't do that. The only way for white to actually make use of this a4, a5 move is to play c5 right here. Alright, and so you might ask, why is this so dangerous? Because after d takes c5, don't we simply exchange queens? But that's not as simple as it looks. After d takes c5, 69 out of 70%, out of 70 games, Bishop b5 was played in the database that I have. So bishop b5 is the main line here. But objectively, d takes c5 might have a lot of merit here as well. It's only been tried once, but the engine thinks this is actually comparable to bishop b5 and maybe even better. The idea of d takes c5 is that after queen takes d1, you actually take back with the king, because if you take back with the knight, then we play knight d5, and we have basically no problems. because the whole point of playing c5 is to push our knight back to d7. So white needs to take with the king to prevent us from playing knight d5. We need to go back. And now the problem is the move knight d5. The other moves are hardly a problem here. For example, if white plays knight b5, now we have an easy defense with knight a6, and white is actually in trouble. If white plays bishop b5 first to pin the knight on d7, then after bishop g7, knight d5. So, wow, I'm lost in thought for 1 second. Let's have a sip of coffee. Much better. Okay, so the point is why this is a worse version than first playing knight d5 is now we can have short castle. We do give up the pawn on e7, but that's well worth it because we can complete our development that way. So losing the pawn is not a big deal. King h8, bishop e3, white desperately, I added that one, tries to hold on to the c5 pawn, knight a6, and no matter what we do, we always have compensation because white has a lot of weaknesses and we have a lot of active pieces coming right up. Yeah, alright, so let's go back. Knight d5, the only annoying move. Obviously, white is threatening knight c7 and winning the rook. So we need to be clever here, and since I want to castle if I can, I decide to put the rook up with rook a7. It's much more clean than playing king d8 because sometimes we still have the chance to castle. And the rook to a7 is less of a big deal than not being able to castle here. Notice, by the way, that knight d5 is better than knight b5 because after knight a6, white can take the knight off the board and win the exchange with a winning position. So we need to play rook a7, and it seems like we have no problems, but actually if white starts developing quickly with a lot of active moves, for example bishop b5, notice on knight c7 doesn't really help because after king d8, knight b5, rook a6, we are quicker with our development. So this does not really help, and we can play knight c6 or rook c6 even to target the c5 pawn in certain cases. So I think that we are very, very healthy. Or at least knight c7 doesn't make a lot of sense here. So bishop b5, white's going to quickly develop. Knight f3 is the same, but let's focus on bishop b5. Bishop g7, knight f3. And here I recommend knight c6, and followed by a short castle and an eventual e5 and f5. Now, I do have to stress that this line does need some testing, but objectively, this white is better still, although white has a lot to prove as well. But white wants to play bishop e3, put his rooks towards the center, and then simply starts pressuring us wherever he can. So, yeah, the engine gives quite a large, no, not quite a large, gives, I think, a plus 0.6 advantage or something like that for white, but I could be mistaken. So yeah, this position is still complicated enough. Even if white gets to the right position, then it still needs quite a lot of homework and quite a lot of accurate play here. Because the ideas that I show here should be quite hard to deal with for white to be accurate. So yeah, this is the Alekhine. We are bound to have a worse position, but this position is fairly okay, I would say still. Yeah, so plus 0.6, that's definitely reasonable. All right, so an interesting idea, not exactly a novelty, d takes c5, but because it's kind of counterintuitive to let us exchange queens when white's attacking, but white's attack is fairly dangerous even without queens on the board. So, interesting idea, d takes c5, but bishop b5 has been played way more often. And so this will be our prime focus. And it's also connected to a little trap here, because we cannot play bishop d7, because our knight will be trapped on b6. White can now take, and after knight c8, our knight is not trapped, excuse me. But after knight c8, white has a very powerful move, which is to move queen d4. We are forced to play f6, and now you can see that we haven't even gotten a pawn here, and we are forced to play an ugly move like f6. Now our bishop will have some trouble developing, and white has a lot of pressure in this position. So after knight f3, I think the engines already say that white has a winning position here. So bishop d7, not good. Knight 8 d7, also not good, because after d takes c5, now the knight is trapped on b6. It can literally go nowhere without being taken off the board. And so the only move that we have is the move knight 6 d7. Also, although it did not include this apparently, knight c6 is followed by d5, and we also lose a piece here. So knight 6 d7, a really awkward move to make. And now white takes back the pawn on c5, or continues the attack with moves like bishop f4. Let's first take a look at d takes c5. White has regained the pawn. Personally, I like this a lot better from the black side, because white takes some time to... white is less quick with the attack. That's how I should put it. Okay. Bishop g7, we keep developing. We need a castle ASAP. Knight f3, short castle, bishop e3. White is playing very normal developing moves and protects the c5 pawn. And now I like knight a6. We're threatening to win a pawn. And if white decides to try and save it with c6, then we have no problems, because after taking rook b8, all our pieces are nicely working. And yeah, we have basically survived the complications that white was going for. So c6 is, well, the line continues a little bit, but in general, this is fine for black. Okay, so knight a6, what happens if white gives the pawn up and goes indeed for the initiative, which is the way I think white should play. Taking the pawn is extremely risky in either case. The worst take is knight d takes, because after rook d1, white's going to have a lot of threats after queen b6 or queen c7 with the move knight d5. We will be extremely under pressure. So, and the same goes for knight 8 takes c5, albeit a bit less, because after rook d1, white still has good compensation, but I think we are surviving a bit more here. But as you can see, white has, I'm pointing towards the screen now, which you cannot see. Good job. Okay, so white has a lot of active pieces at the moment. The rook on d1, I should use this, of course. All these pieces are extremely active, the rook on d1 especially, while we still have a few passive pieces at the moment. So you can see how dangerous white's initiative is here. So instead, I don't think we should take. I think we should make sure white cannot jump to d5 with the move knight b4. A novelty I came up with. And then after short castle, if white plays rook d1, we can now simply go out of the way, because the knight d5 jump is protected against. And so after short castle, we also want to play queen c7, and depending on what move white makes, we can either take the pawn, preferably, but if white defends the pawn indirectly or directly, we can also put a knight on e5 and finish our development by moving the bishop out. So I think that we survived here. With a decent position, I think we are not worse here. So I think taking the pawn is the wrong way to go for white, with d takes c5 in this position. And so I think that white should try to move bishop f4. Now, there wasn't... I should mention this, and that's that there was a dangerous move here as well, which is the move bishop g5. That has been played this year, I think, and this move might create some problems for us too. The reason is the same as after bishop f4, which is that is we take queen takes, the rook on h8 is attacked, and we have to play an ugly move like f6, which is definitely not what we want. And if I'm not mistaken, the right move for black is to play bishop g7, and then after knight f3, white simply doesn't care about this pawn on c5, white does not want to take it. White simply wants to castle and play against the e7 pawn. I think that this is a dangerous variation for black as well, although it has not been played that often either. I'm doing this on the top of my head, but I think the best move might actually be to simply play h6, and then after bishop h4, now play bishop g7. And the idea is that if white ever plays knight d5, we have the extra option to play g5 in certain positions. I think that's one of the clues to do after bishop g5, but I'm going to be honest, I haven't analyzed bishop g5 for this course yet. It's a very new move. It has been played I think only a handful of times maximal, at maximum. But this could potentially be a struggle for us as well. So, yeah, but since this line hasn't been played that often, I have left it out of the course. But I would say let the engine run through it maybe once or twice and see what he comes up with after this move, bishop g5. So. Apologies that it's not in the course. Okay, so what is in the course? The most played move is bishop f4, and bishop f4 was also a tough nut to crack, I have to say, because white is extremely aggressive at this point. White is threatening to play knight d5 and knight c7 to win the exchange, so we need to play bishop g7. Once again, if we take, white plays queen takes, and in this case can even long castle, piling on the pressure on our position. And we are simply screwed already here. So we need to play bishop g7 instead. And after knight d5, the best move here, white needs to continue the pressure. For example, if white plays knight f3, simply castle, and the compensation is still not yet 100% clear. The other way around, white's attack is halted a little bit more. If white does not play knight d5 immediately, things will become more easy for us. So, knight d5, and we cannot play short castle. This is the point, because now white has bishop c7, queen e8, and knight b6. And funnily enough, we are losing material, because if we play rook a7, white wins not only the knight, but the rook is actually also trapped still, because the knight is pinned on e8. A horrible position for us. So, I think objectively the best move is actually rook a6 here now, but we are lost either way. So we are totally overrun at this point. So short castle is not a good move in this position. Knight a6 could be an interesting alternative, but it does involve an exchange sacrifice. But yeah, the engines thought this was an interesting alternative, but to me, the best move clearly is to move e5. So the point is very simple. We want to block the knight coming to c7 by playing the e5 move. So, the most played move here is d takes e5, while I personally think bishop takes e5 is the much stronger move here for white. So if white plays d takes e5, let's take a look first at this, because this is more often played. We're going to castle, and now after knight f3, we need to develop as smoothly as possible, and we are not material down at this point, so if we develop, we should more or less be fine. And the best move here is actually knight b6. We want to get our bishop out as soon as possible. And yeah, white has a few moves here, but none of them really scare me. Well, one a little bit, but not too much. If white goes back, well, we simply develop. We play knight c6. And white cannot, well, white can, but I would definitely not mind it if white would exchange. So white should play short castle. And now after bishop g4, we actually have a very, very nice position, which is roughly equal, I think. Yeah, we are fine here. So white needs to play the move knight f6 in order to make things complicated. If white takes the knight off the board, then we take back. Short castle, knight c6. Easy development. We want to put a rook on d8 quickly, put a bishop on e6, and we should be fine. So knight f6, a pawn sacrifice, because we need to take. E takes, queen takes, and white has decent compensation for the pawn since our dark squares are quite weak at this point. So I thought this looked a little bit scary for black, but I think objectively this position is actually is simply fine for us. So this position scares me a little bit. For example, white can play bishop e5. Notice how rook e8 is not possible because of bishop takes e8. Queen f5, short castle, bishop d7. Let's trade off one pair of bishops if white allows us, but probably white will play bishop d3. Queen h5, and now we can follow up with knight c6. Quick development. We can try to exchange one pair of bishops. And notice also how white has these squares kind of under control or attacked, but white cannot yet make use of that. And yeah, so we are a pawn up in compensation, and I think it's fair to say that the position is roughly equal at this point. Yeah, so I think that d takes e5 is worse than bishop takes e5. Bishop takes e5 was tougher not to crack. We need to take. Sorry, we need to not take. No, because taking actually gives white a large advantage. And the reason for it is that after d takes, short castle, f4, we cannot move the knight to b6 anymore. Well, we can actually, but white has knight f6, which otherwise would not be there because of the bishop on g7. This is the reason why I like bishop takes e5 better than d takes e5, because this position is wonderful for white. King g7, knight f3, and white has, yeah, simply the more active and better pieces at this point. And white will start targeting the c5 pawn as well. So we cannot take after bishop takes. I think it's better to play short castle. White should probably take on g7, but I've included a few more alternatives. Bishop c7, not recommended because we can play queen g5. And white has problems since right now this is a double attack. This is not helpful at all for white. White could play bishop d6, which is actually kind of interesting because it's a little bit of a bait. Rook e8 looks like the most logical move, but after knight e2, white can actually win the exchange on the next move of playing knight c7 or win the pawn. So my main line goes c takes d4, knight c7, and white will win the exchange anyway. So if white is going to win the exchange anyway, then I prefer to grab the dark squared bishop by playing c takes d4. If white takes, then I would be very happy actually, because after queen takes, knight e2 for example, queen d6, knight df4. If white did not play knight e2, then the knight would have been stuck. So knight e2 is a good move. Knight df4, knight a6, short castle, knight b4. And I actually think we have more than that. We have very, very decent compensation for the exchange. We have one pawn, we have very active pieces, and yeah, this is not one for white easily. I wouldn't mind trying out this position at the very least. Although objectively white is better here, I think black has compensation to show for it. So, but I do think bishop d6 is an interesting move to consider for white, because we do have to give up the exchange here. By the way, it's probably even better for white to play knight e2, because once again, if we play rook e8, then knight c7 wins the exchange again for white. So here we should play knight c6, with most likely a similar position to what happened before. For example, taking, short castle, queen d6, knight df4, knight b4, and we've transposed to the previous variation. Yeah, it's an interesting position to try out. I do believe black has good compensation there. Okay, so bishop takes g7 is the main line here. And after king takes, d takes c5, white needs to grab the pawn in this case, or otherwise his advantage will not be there anymore. So white is a pawn up, and if we take the pawn back, then white has a trick with queen d4, winning the piece. So we cannot take back on c5. And once again, if we play rook e8, then that, even in this case, that backfires a little bit for us, because the rook will be pinned. The rook will be the target of a pin. The knight will be pinned, obviously. And then it will be even harder to put pressure on the c5 pawn. So I think for now, it's better to omit rook e2. It's well met by knight e2 and then short castle. So I think it's better to simply play knight c6 at this point. Yeah, and here I have a suggestion for white. I analyzed this position quite deeply to see how exactly you should play. And the main advice I can give here is always to try and play actively. We need to untangle this bishop first, so... Wow, okay. So we need to play the move knight d e5 or knight takes c5 at some point. Rook e8, not always the best because of the pin, once again. We omitted that for a reason. And yeah, that's more or less it. That's the general idea for this position. And so let's start with rook c1, one of the most logical moves to protect the pawn c5. We can play knight d5 now, as mentioned before. And we want to develop our bishop to a good square, either to e6, f5, or g4, depending on what white exactly does. White probably will play knight e2, because if knight f3, then bishop g4 is a pin, and pins are awesome for us, so white shouldn't do that. Knight e2 makes a lot of sense. Bishop e6 is now the best move, and if white plays knight e3, also makes a lot of sense. Then after queen takes, rook takes, knight d7, rook c1, attacking the c5 pawn. Notice how white still hasn't castled yet, and that gives us valuable time. Rook ac8, and I actually think we win back the pawn already after knight b4. So I think we have successfully equalized from this point. But notice how we quickly developed here, as quickly as possible, and then targeted the c5 pawn. What else? What happens if white plays knight e2 immediately? Well, we can now take the pawn, actually, because, well, queen d4 is protected by the knight for now. But if white takes, b takes, this is not in the files, then after queen d4, f6, the knight is actually also hanging. So if white takes the knight, we can take the knight on d5. And since this pawn is super weak, it doesn't matter that we have an isolated pawn at this point, because these two pawns are extremely weak as well. Yeah, and white cannot create a knight d4, rook b8, b3 setup, because we can undermine the knight for playing rook e8 and rook e4, and then white will lose the pawn. On the top of my head. Yeah, I do know that bishop takes c6 does not win white the piece, at the very least. Yeah, maybe we can even play king g8 here, but I'm not too sure. f6 looks normal to me. I do think that queen takes d5 is mandatory. After c takes, this might be actually okay too, but yeah, my instinct tells me queen takes d5, but we'll have to see. It looks like white cannot hold on to the b pawn after queen takes d5, so it looks logical. Okay. If white cannot win the piece, white can continue with development. If white plays short castle, then we can play bishop f5, which is quite nice. Quite nice position for the bishop, and I don't see how white could have an advantage here. White could play rook c1, targeting our knight. We move the knight to e4, the best square. Short castle, bishop e6, for example. At ef4, takes, knight f6. And yeah, for example, knight takes, queen takes, and I think we have successfully equalized once again. So, yeah, knight e2 does look like one of the most dangerous moves here, but I do think that with the examples that I showed, we are definitely within margin to hold this position equal, or at least liquidate to a drawish ending. Alright, so one more move to consider, which is queen e2. This was actually played in the game, and here black actually played the move knight f6. Very good move. The idea is very simple actually. White's playing for a trick. If we take, then white's queen c3, double attack, winning the knight. Very cheeky. So knight f6 was played. Very good move. White took. White could also play knight b6, but after taking rook b8, we are still down a pawn, but the king on d2 is very, very vulnerable. For example, we're already threatening knight e4, knight takes c5. And we should have once again enough compensation for the pawn. Yeah. So knight takes was played, queen takes, knight e2, and now rook d8 gives black good compensation for the pawn. Our pieces are very active, and if we start targeting these pawns once again, we should be able to equalize. So yeah, now on to my suggestion for white. My suggestion is to play queen c1. It is, for me, it's a very clever move to play because we are protecting c5, and after knight d5, we cannot trade off queens anymore because the queen is not on d1. So I thought this move was very clever. For example, if we now play knight f6, then knight b6 is a lot better because after rook b8, knight e2, we were unable to exchange queens on d2. And now we are simply a full pawn down since c5 is very well protected at this point. So in this case, I think we should once again focus on developing knight d e5. And here white needs to move the knight away, so knight b6 is the most logical move to play. Knight f4 is also interesting to prevent us from playing knight d3, but after knight b4, white cannot stop us from playing knight d3. For example, knight g2, check, takes. Rook a3, a very nice move. The rook joins the action through unconventional measures in unconventional way. Yeah, that works, okay. But after queen e4, white is still in a bit of trouble because we have a lot of threats. For example, if white plays rook e3, the a4 pawn is hanging, and white cannot castle because the e2 knight is hanging. So white is not yet out of the woods, and we can still target c5. However, white tries to play this position. So yeah, we still have good compensation then. Knight b6 was the more tricky idea, and here I actually found a really, really nice idea that I simply wanted to share as well. The usual move, rook b8, is actually it's still okay, but after queen c3, queen g5, I mean, we do have compensation still, and I did give this as an alternative. But it seems that white has a good way of dealing with this idea with queen g5, and we're still a long way from capturing this pawn with the good queen on c3. So, yeah, we cannot play knight b4 because of queen c3. Knight b4 looks tempting because, well, of course, we're threatening to win the queen now. But after queen c3, we are actually losing because we need to protect the e5 knight. It's with check. And our rook on a8 is also undefended for now. So I have a really cool idea, which is knight d3 check. We don't care about the rook. White needs to take. And here I have a few lines to consider. If white takes the rook now, that's not good because of rook e8. And white loses the queen because after... Well, actually it's already mate because queen e3 is the only move. At the very least we win the queen, but actually after knight d4, threatening mate on c2, white is actually already going to be mated in 2 moves. For example, rook c1. Well, easiest in this case is simply to win the rook. King d1, bishop g4, and it's actually already made like this. So not in the files, just on the top of my head. So, but yeah, after knight d4, it's already over for white. White cannot take the rook. White needs to develop or play queen e3. So what happens, or queen c3 is actually a very logical move here as well. Exchanging queens, but after taking rook e8 check, a very nice in-between move, knight e2, rook b8. White struggles to, well, white cannot castle yet, so we gain some valuable time. Let's say white plays f3 to get the king to f2. Then now after rook e5, we win back the pawn, and we actually have more or less equalized in this position. So queen c3 doesn't work for white. The most challenging move was queen e3, and here, this position I actually gave to my students to solve. And the idea here is that, yeah, I'm just going to show it to you. Unless you want to take a minute or two to think about this position, then go ahead. You can pause the video. All right, but to show, the best move here is rook e8. It's a full rook sacrifice. White needs to take, and now we're actually sacrificing a second rook with bishop e6. And the whole point is that the queen will be offside, giving us an opportunity to go for the mate against the king. So white can take the rook in 2 ways. Knight takes a8, then knight d4, and this doesn't make too much of a difference compared to queen takes a8. So let's focus on that. Knight d4, f3. We're threatening mate here with knight c2. If white plays now, for example, f3 is my main line, which leads to a perpetual. If white plays rook c1, we also have a perpetual of queen e4 check, king f1, queen d3 check, and yeah, if white wants to continue with knight e2, then white's going to be really unhappy because if I'm not mistaken, knight takes e2 is actually incredibly dangerous since the rook cannot move. Let's say it goes here, then now it's actually already over for white. Kind of cool, right? Yeah. So white needs to take the draw, either with rook c1, queen e4, or with f3. And after f3, we have a perpetual of queen e3 check, king f1, queen d3 check, and white has nothing better than to take the perpetual. If white continues with king f2, queen e2, king g3, then here we actually also win with the move knight f5 check. And white cannot prevent mate because after king h3 we have queen h6, followed by queen h4 with a mate. Yeah, I thought this double rook sacrifice was extremely cool. That's why I included it. But once again, we are diving into a big abyss in a lack of theory, if that makes sense. This whole variation is extremely new. And bishop takes e5, the move that I showed, hasn't even been played that often. So, yeah, I do think that this line is extremely dangerous, and I hope you get that feeling too while we went over the lines here. I did briefly try to come up with a slightly better move than g6 here, but I wasn't able to make that work, unfortunately. So, yeah, I think this is definitely a line to keep in mind, this c5 move. And after d takes, bishop b5, knight 67. Keep in mind that bishop f4 is not the only move, and that bishop g5 might also be played in the future. So, yeah, once again, apologies that this move is not in the course, but at least you are now aware that these moves exist. And you can turn the engine on yourself and take a look at this move if you want. But I am thinking that this a4 move is going to be a lot more popular in the future. So, yeah, that's why I think it was necessary to give this one a separate chapter. So, yeah. I think that's it. Oh no, that's not it. Of course, a4 is not the only 6 move here. We need to play check, for example, the move d5 as well. d5 is also kind of a clever alternative as well, because, well, let's say you're playing a blitz game and you already know what's going to happen with g6. You pre-move g6. Well, g6 is actually still good. Yeah. It looks like a mistake because white can play queen d4, but that's actually okay. And I'm going to show you in a little bit why and how. We do have an alternative of e6. It seems good enough too. e5 is good enough too, I think, although I really like the move g6. White is saying basically, I tricked you because I can play queen d4. But instead we are saying, I tricked you because queen d4 is not necessarily good. Yeah. So if white plays normally, first of all, with knight c3, for example, bishop g7, and now move like bishop e2, castle, bishop e3. I like this move order a bit better because white postpones knight f3 so that we cannot move our bishop to g4 yet. I think this is kind of clever. But in this case, we are in time for counterplay with e6. I mean, d5 did cost white a little bit of time. And after now, knight f3, for example, taking bishop g4, we have no problem. So I think d4, d5 only works if white tries to play queen d4. That's also most likely what's going to happen. Let's take a look at what happens if white tries to be clever in a different way by putting a bishop on d4 quickly. Well, now we can play bishop g7. Bishop d4, takes, and now a really nice move, e5. I like this a lot. The point is that d takes e6 is actually it's not a mistake, but I think it's dangerous for white, because after short castle, very good move, e takes, for example, rook takes, we have such quick development that I think that we more than compensate for the pawn in this case. We can play very aggressively with moves like knight c6, maybe even followed with knight b4, and then bishop f5 and queen f6 ideas as well. This looks extremely good for black. Yeah, so probably it's best for white to retreat the queen, but then our weak dark squares are covered at least by the pawn on e5. Let's make it green. Short castle, knight c3, and now, for example, a5, creating more dark squares for us. A common idea in the King's Indian as well, by the way, to play a5 and secure the c5 square. And the position is roughly equal. I mean, it's a position where both players have chances. The fight is going to start pretty soon. So, but objectively, this is at least fine for us. Queen d4. Knight f3 is also a move to consider here. Bishop g7, bishop b2. Maybe even the best way to play for white. White wants the castle as soon as possible, so if we play e6, white can start targeting the d6 pawn quickly. And here I actually found a novelty for us. It's an idea that my engine came up with. And the point is that I wanted to avoid short castle, bishop g4. Makes a lot of sense, right? The knight is on f3, so we play bishop g4. But now knight a3 kind of worried me. And the point is that white is protecting the c4 pawn, so our bishop takes f3 idea doesn't work anymore. But the thing is that if we still play e6 at some point, then white is now in time to target the d6 pawn in my opinion. So I thought this position was slightly unpleasant for us. Hence the novelty here, which is to move bishop d7. My idea is to play knight a4 and start attacking quite rapidly. For example, short castle, knight a4. Looks fantastically weird. That's also why I like it. Looks weird. Knight on the rim is dim. Well, this knight is certainly not dim. For example, if white plays queen c2, we can put the other knight on the rim. Awesome stuff. And we can play knight b4 on the next move, targeting more stuff on the queen side, especially, of course, the pawn on b2. And if white decides to take his losses with knight c3, we can take it off the board, and we have fantastic squares for our pieces, and the target, of course, with the double pawns on the c-file. Queen c2 makes a lot of sense to play, so white needs to play a very weird looking move, which is queen d2. The point is that the queen will not be attacked on d2. And if white plays queen b3, then once again knight a6, and in this case the queen will be attacked either like this or like this, so we once again can make use of the queen. Hence queen d2 being the best move. And now I still think knight a6 is good. White still needs to develop somehow, and white can do that by playing knight d4. A very strong move. White wants to play b3, bishop b2, and the knight blocks our bishop from attacking the b2 pawn. We cannot stop that, unfortunately. We should play short castle. White can play b3. And here I like the move queen b6. We're saying we're not moving our knight just yet. Protect the d4 knight first, please. White says yes, of course. And now I have a wonderful computer move here in mind, which is the move e5. With a lot of tactical shenanigans ahead is my note in the file. It is exquisite. I mean, this 6-move alternatives chapter, the d5 move is probably not going to happen pretty often, but still, if it happens and you have used the move trainer to learn this line and you throw out this e5 idea, if white is even strong enough to, or fantastic enough to find the queen d2 move earlier, then you have the answer with e5. You have a beautiful position on the board. So if white takes, that's the main line. If white plays knight c2, now we go back. Knight c3, knight b4. And notice how we have solved the problem with our e-pawn this way. All our pieces are well positioned at this point, and I think that both players have about equal chances here. So, what happens after d takes e6, you ask? Very good question. Well, we take back with the f pawn, and we have another pin. Pins are awesome, right? It was already pinned, I know, but now we have an extra motive. And now you might ask yourself, but don't we lose a piece? Very good question. We do, but we get it back. Bishop takes a4, and white is stuck. White is losing, actually. Well, that's maybe a little bit too enthusiastic. White is not losing, but white will have an extremely hard time keeping the position together because we have pins galore, and we can create a lot of threats here. For example, bishop b2, protecting everything, taking, knight c5, and notice how white still cannot develop, because if the knight goes to c3, we win a piece, because the queen cannot protect the knight and the bishop at the same time. And we have a threat with knight e4 as well, so I should not have gotten rid of those arrows. Knight e4 is another dangerous threat here, and that is because the f2 pawn is a target. If white tries to protect it with bishop f3, then we can play knight a4, and then white is screwed once again. So a wonderful motive. I hope we get it on the board. I hope you get it on the board, obviously, because I think white will be baffled and completely in awe of like, what's happening here, if it ever happens. Fantastic. All right. Yeah, maybe a lot of work for a sideline, but I tried to be as thorough as possible. And the d5 move was actually kind of tricky to answer as well. So that's why, yeah, I put some extra effort in this. Now, obviously, we need to go and take a look towards the main line, which is after g6 to move queen b4. And yeah, here we can play e5 once again. It looks like this wins white a pawn after d takes e6. And temporarily that's the case, but we don't lose more than a pawn for now with the move f6. And the thing is that since the queen is on d4, we can start getting a lot of compensation here. And I actually personally thought that this position looked kind of nice for us. So from a pawn structure perspective, this looks horrible because of the pawn on f6. But if we go and take a look a little bit deeper, then you can see that this is actually perfectly all right for black. It was also played by a friend of mine, multiple Brazilian champion Alexander Fier, a teammate of mine, and we've played in tournaments together. So I'm very happy to include him in this course. Yeah, and for example, white can play knight c3, knight c6, queen e3. White is hanging on to the pawn, and white can also leave the pawn. Maybe that's even better. With queen h4. Queen h4 probably one of the better moves here. We take the pawn now. Knight f3, bishop g7. If white plays bishop e2, we castle, short castle. And since the queen is on h4, we can actually make use of that queen by playing g5. Queen e4, and now queen d7. And look at our position. The bishop is still bad, obviously, but all our other pieces are working very nicely. Even already have ideas connected with this, potentially. Although a d5 move looks sufficient too, in this case. So, yeah. If white plays bishop h6 in this position, we can take, play queen e7. We have a little discovery going on here. And now after long castle, we can play d5, rook h e8, and the position is about roughly equal. Yeah. The reason why I did not want to take the pawn, by the way, is because white will get a lot of initiative after that. So instead, I just wanted to castle very quickly, play d5, and then we have equalized. So that's queen h4. I have two other moves, but yeah, let's show this one actually. Queen f4. In this case, I think the best move is actually to play d5 immediately. And after c takes, knight takes, queen takes. We are more than fine. We win back the pawn. And if white's too greedy with queen takes f6, then we can actually already win with the move bishop b4 check. King e2, rook f8, who needs the castle, right? And then we will have a winning position already. White is toast. So, white cannot take the pawn. White should probably play queen e4. And that transposes to another line, which I'm going to show you now. Because the main move here is queen e3. And after queen e3, we once again want to play the move d5. C takes, knight takes, and now once again knight takes. That's the main line. Once again, it's better to play queen e4, most likely. Knight takes, b takes, queen a5, targeting the c3 pawn. We could target this pawn as well, but white has a good defense with bishop c4, so queen a5 makes more sense. Bishop d2, f5. We want to kick this queen away so that we can take the pawn. Queen b1. If we take the pawn, he takes our pawn on b7. So we cannot take just yet. We should play bishop g7 first. Targeting this pawn now. White can still protect everything with the queen. It's amazing how many moves that queen has made. But now queen e5 check. We win back the pawn and we have an equal position at the very least. Bishop e2, queen takes, and I actually would pick black anytime here. So, but I also want to show you how things can go wrong for white. And that's what happens if white takes, because that looks like a very natural move here. Well, after queen takes, knight f3, this is the game which I mentioned before. This is a game between Grandmaster Vasquez, if I'm not mistaken, he's a Chilean Grandmaster, against Alexander Fier, and this was a chess.com game. And here I have an improvement over that game, and I think bishop c5 would have given us a tremendous initiative, actually. For example, queen h6, bishop takes d6, bishop b2, bishop b4. Long castle is good enough too. Short castle, rook h8, and we have the much better pieces in this position. But I like bishop b4, bishop d2, takes, the queen was still there. Long castle, queen takes, bishop takes, short castle, rook h8, and it's clear that since we are much more active, we are having the advantage in the endgame. So yeah, this is the d5 move. This is the queen d4 idea, which we can counter very nicely with very active play and a temporary pawn sacrifice. We're simply getting out of the woods very quickly here. So I like this line a lot. Thanks, Alexander, for playing this game and showing it to me. Although probably unintentionally, I'm pretty sure. So let's go back, because there's one sideline which is still needed to mention, which is b3. It should transpose to other lines after g6, and if white tries to play bishop b2, then we are more than happy because the bishop is misplaced on b2. We should play normally with d5, knight c6, short castle, and in any case the bishop is not well placed on b2. And that's all that I should mention about this, I think. Yeah. Alright, a super long video, I know, but this is one of the most important lines in the future, I think, in the exchange variation. So, yeah, I wanted to spend an extra time on this. Okay, so that's it. Do check the files as well. Practice this with the move trainer as well, because this is raw, aggressive play from white in the a4 line. So it's good to use the move trainer here, I think. All right. Hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.